pollution's march and the battles. So here's a direct experience. You're an instrumentation engineer servicing analytic lab equipment. You're asked to go to El Paso, Texas, to a big name company that does copper. And so you arrive at what was a massive industrial site to see one huge warehouse left out of dozens, with a few chimneys coming off of it. So in this lab samples for high and ultra high purity metals. So it is the cream of the copper crop. In high purity coppers meant for specialty applications. This analyzer has, I'm going to say 20 some odd channels in it. Each channel is worth about $20,000. So what this plant does is makes high purity copper and copper alloys. And looking out the window, right across the Rio Grande River, is this company's new copper refinery. Now, it's not new. The whole facility I mentioned that was empty was moved about a mile south across the border into Mexico. Huge copper smelting facility with all the pollution liabilities sitting there off in the distance in another country. And this facility is using the outputs of that plant, which is General Copper for wiring and whatever else. So massive production, massive need for copper wires, and underneath that is specialty metals. And we could go into who uses these specialty metals, where they would go, who could afford ultra high purity things versus a copper wire from the local retailer. So that's one little picture of the moves American companies made. That facility plan took 5, 10, 20 years. They moved the bulk of the aged equipment. They did add some new processes. They did add some new filters, but not as many as they would have had to if they were on this side of the river. So was that corporation taxed because the pollution all blew back into America, almost every bit of it? Those stacks on the Mexican side of the border that used to be on a mile away on the American side of the border still dump into our airspace. Trump's wall is not going to be high enough to solve that. That factory still pollutes into the Rio Grande. Granted, they spent a fortune on upgrading their pollution equipment, but now it was upgraded to 1950s standards, and I bet that plant's still there today. So somehow taxes, tax incentives, tax write-offs made it cheaper for them to move, and labor was involved. Believe me, labor was involved. But to move a $500 million facility, a facility that has a 50-year life cycle, it needs that life cycle. It's going to take half that long to pay for itself. Then everything after that is almost pure profits. So there is one pollution story, one little tip of an iceberg of hundreds that I was there. People were there. There were people around me. There were my peers there who I had to ask about the metallurgy for the instrument, just as a learning exercise, because I knew the channel and the routine I had to go through to add another channel into this already sophisticated instrument. This is a $500,000 instrument in $1 million lab in a multi-million-dollar building. And I'm a seagull. I come in for a few days and go. The next place I go into is testing the metals from failed jet engines. The next place I go into is melting used steel for rebar. And there's radiation detectors decades ago up in the rafters, because they have a vague idea that something's wrong if they see that detector go off. They haven't got a clue what it is. They probably call somebody, they set aside a batch of metal, or they go cut it in half, mix it with more metal, and get half the reading they did the last time so that they can get rid of the shit. Yeah, that is how it works. In unregulated business, that's how it works. This is the libertarian scam. This is why libertarians hide among the faithful. They can get away with pulling this stuff. Rant off. History off. This was history. Pollution history. Thank you much.